I guess we can get started. Great. So welcome everyone to the webinar. And thanks very much to Patrick from Baldwin for helping with our AV today. Really appreciate seeing a number of attendees who have joined us and some familiar names. We're just loading up our slides here. And feel free to use the Q&A box to add in any questions as we go. I'll just make sure that everyone's in the right place. So we're part of the session Paving a Path for Digital Equity and Transformation in Peel Region. And I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jessica Quick. I'm with the Peel Newcomer Strategy Group, and we're the local immigration partnership for Peel based at United Way of Greater Toronto. So today we have a couple of great presentations. I'm just going to set it up by starting with a land acknowledgement. So just acknowledging that some of you may be in Vancouver, but for those who are joining, we're just going to share the land acknowledgement for Peel. We'd like to acknowledge the land that we work on is the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, acknowledging the territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. It's also the land that's home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Greatly appreciate working on this land. I'm just going to give really a brief zoomed out look at some of our work. But before I do, I'm just going to give a bit of a sense of our agenda for the session. So we are going to welcome two presentations. One is by, I guess we're switching it up. We're going to have number 3 first, looking at some research on digital equity for newcomer services in Peel. I hope I have that order right. I think I mixed it up. We're actually going to start with Code for Canada, and we're going to focus on some digital maturity work that happen across organizations in the settlement sector in the region, followed by some research from some work up through our local immigration partnership in partnership with Peel Children's Aid Society's Child Welfare Immigration Center of Excellence and the Peel Multicultural Council, looking at those that have not had access to digital services for newcomer services. And then we'll finish off with Q&A, so there's an opportunity. So again, please use that chat box for the Q&A if you have any questions as we go. So just to zoom out, here's a little bit of how we encapsulated some of our work. We realized that there has been transformation already in the sector as we moved through the pandemic, and out of it, we're starting to see that digital services are a requirement and that it's happening very much at an organizational level. And so with different capacities and different sizes of organizations, we really wanted to capture how could we work together better. So we really started with that middle section of thinking about how can we develop a shared roadmap. And so we're going to hear from Code for Canada about that. And how can we learn together? So we had a learning series about artificial intelligence just this year. Moving more to the center, we really wanted to be client-centered and newcomer-centered. So we did do that research, as I mentioned, around digital equity and thinking about how can we make sure we're not leaving anyone behind as we transform towards more digital services and hybrid services. And how can we build the capacity of our staff? So we did do some video training to see how we can leverage video in terms of outreach to newcomers. And this is all kind of laddering up to that broader view of the sector and how we can collaborate and envision together. So all the digital pieces and the collaboration are necessary to think about our future in terms of referring to each other's services. How can we leverage data for sector planning? And how can we think about shared collaborative sharing of policies, for example, around artificial intelligence? And knowing that IRCC is moving towards more of a centralized needs assessment, needs and assets assessment and referral system through centralized designated service providers. So I'll stop there. Just from that overview. I'll then now hand it over to Kay and Dorothy from Code for Canada to introduce themselves.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Nice to be here with everybody. As Jessica mentioned, I'm with Code for Canada. My name is Dorothy. We've got some intros coming up, and also I've got Kay here alongside me. And we're going to talk to everybody about the work that we did with Peel Newcomer Strategy Group on really understanding and assessing the kind of digital maturity in the Peel Halton settlement sector. So on the next slide, we've got this pretty striking quote that we got through our research, which is that everyone is trying to do digital transformation in their own way. And I thought we'd start with these words, these were shared from a leader of a settlement agency in Peel, because they are quite striking. And as Jessica just mentioned, digital transformation is very top of mind for settlement agencies in Peel Halton. And since the pandemic, and in many cases, even before the pandemic, Peel Halton settlement agencies have been transforming to meet the evolving needs of their staff and their clients and funders in an increasingly digital world. And as a result, each agency has been kind of individually tackling their own data and technology challenges and coming up with their own unique solutions. So on the next slide, today what we're going to talk about is the work that we did at Code for Canada with PNSG, and we're going to talk a bit about our recent work with the Peel Halton Settlement Partnership Executive Council. In late 2023, we began engaging their network of more than 30 IRCC-funded agencies who serve newcomers across Peel and Halton. And the goal of that work was to first understand the needs and experiences of agencies when it comes to data, technology, and digital. And then from there, we wanted to collectively identify actions to support digital transformation from the sector as a whole. So in other words, really the challenge at hand was to shift away from this idea that digital transformation is a siloed endeavor undertaken by each individual agency on their own and work towards a model of kind of a shared understanding. And with this kind of shared understanding, really that shift towards kind of a shared commitment across, Peel and Halton to tackle digital transformation together as an enabler of better service delivery across the entire sector. Next slide. So just before we dive into the actual work that we did, just wanted to give you a bit of context in case you're not already familiar with us. So my name is Dorothy. I'm the CEO of Code for Canada. I'm here with Kay, who is our design chapter lead from Code for Canada. Code for Canada is a national nonprofit using tech and design to improve lives in Canada. We do that primarily by partnering with public benefit organizations like yourselves, a lot of NGOs out there doing great work across Canada to help ensure that everyone in this country has access to inclusive, equitable, and responsive public services that meet them where they're at. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kay, who led a lot of this great work around digital transformation across the sector in the Peel region. And explain some of the process that she took and some of the findings that were uncovered in that process.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dorothy. All right, folks. So to give you a bit of a sense of what this work was all about, over the course of 5 months, we engaged more than 30 settlement agencies from across Peel Halton in a range of research activities. And we heard directly from agency leaders about some of those challenges, things that they saw that might be standing in the way of the sector's overall digital transformation. Much like this quote here, or one of our leaders said, we need best practices and guidance for agencies. We're all trying to figure out digital. Very similar to that earlier quote that Dorothy mentioned. Now, the full scope of the research focused on several different areas. That said, in the interest of time today, I'm going to share a deep dive on one of those, which is digital maturity. And really, the goal of the digital maturity work was to explore the current state of digital maturity amongst Peel, Halton settlement agencies, and then ultimately being able to recommend a minimum level of digital maturity for the sector moving forward. Now, for those of you who might be wondering, well, what do we actually mean when we say digital maturity? You are in luck, because on our next slide, we've got some wonderful definitions for you. Always good to start with a good definition. Make sure we're all on the same page. So when we say digital maturity, what we mean is how well an organization is prepared to embrace digital transformation. And that, of course, brings us to our second definition. When we say digital transformation, what we're really talking about here is the active use of data and technology as enablers for better service delivery. And this notion of it being enablers is really, really important here. Digital transformation, it's almost never about an organization becoming a completely digital organization, okay? Instead, digital transformation, what it's really about is enhancing the impact that an agency can have on its clients by using data, by using technology in the most effective ways, okay? So let's keep these definitions in mind, and we're going to discuss a little bit more about digital maturity, again, being how well an organization is prepared to embrace digital transformation. And we're going to talk about digital maturity and how it was assessed within the Peel, Halton settlement sector agencies. So on our next slide, what we have here is a bit of a snapshot of the assessment that was used. So to assess the digital maturity of Peel, Halton settlement agencies, we administered Code for Canada's digital maturity assessment tool. So essentially, agencies were provided with the self-assessment format of the tool, and they were invited to reflect on their own organization based on these 6 indicators of digital maturity. All right. So we've got client-centric service design and delivery. That's about really embedding client centricity into day-to-day operations. We've got oversight and support for digital. So how digital is recognized and valued across all levels of the organization. Practices and platforms for data sharing. So how to enable access and use data for efficient decision-making. Infrastructure and resources for digital. So evaluating needs and how digital is being invested in. Ways of working. So that culture piece about experimentation, about working in the open, collaboration, all of those important pieces in a digital organization. And then finally, skills and hiring. So ensuring that there's this robust talent pipeline and making space for developing new skills. Now, for those of you who like the details about approach, the snapshot, or pardon me, the assessment, it was shared with 34 agencies and was completed by 15 of them. So we've got about a 44% response rate, which is, not too bad. On our next slide, we'll have a little more detail here about the assessment itself. So as I mentioned, agencies were provided with the self-assessment, and they responded to a series of questions that were on a scale of 1 to 7. So this scale of 7 levels reflects the different levels of digital maturity. So we're starting all the way from level 1, which is limited digital maturity. That's sort of in the form of very minimal digital infrastructure. There's probably still a lot of paper-based processes within level 1 organizations. All the way up to level 7, where you've got those organizations that are leading when it comes to digital maturity. This is in the form of them perhaps being the go-to experts who really demonstrate what it looks like to leverage innovative approaches and usages for digital technology, for data-driven strategies, and all of those important pieces, okay? So with these different levels in mind, let's head over to the next slide, and we're going to look at a bit of a snapshot that formed based on the results from everyone who participated in the assessment. A couple of things I want to draw your attention to. One, within the graph here, you're going to see on the outer perimeter are 6 different indicators that are used to assess digital maturity. And as I mentioned, each of those indicators has that scale of 1 to 7. 1 being low digital maturity, 7 being high, as I just mentioned. Now, the green points that are plotted on our graph here represent the agency that had the highest response average for each of those indicators. And then on the flip side, the blue represents the agency with the lowest response average for each of those indicators. And then the orange, we've got the average of the average. So sort of representing that within the current state of our sector. You're gonna notice that there's probably a bit of a wide gap between the agencies with the highest and the lowest digital maturity. This snapshot, it's given a really good picture that while, for the most part, agencies in the sector, they're doing pretty well when it comes to digital maturity. That said, there's certainly room for growth, right? Like seeing the distance between the blue and the green really shows that there's some, help that's needed to improve those who are on that lower end of digital maturity so that they can meet their peers at that higher level. On our next slide, we have the same data shown in a different view for those who like to look at the nuts and bolts numbers. So you can see the highest, the lowest, and the average result for each indicator. Here, it's really, really clear. We can see that some agencies self-assessed at truly being on that leading edge when it came to digital maturity, whereas other agencies felt that they were still very much at a developing level, okay? On our next slide, we're going to shift our focus to that minimum recommendation for digital maturity that I was mentioning earlier. So based on the results of the sector, it was recommended that level 5 or proficient level of digital maturity was one that all of the agencies in the sector can strive towards. And so you can now see that recommended minimum level being plotted on the map here in red. Now, level 5 proficient digital maturity. This looks like agencies that are able to deliver services that are data-driven, services that are user-focused, and services that are streamlined through the use of technology. Again, because we're talking about technology as an enabler for making services more equitable and more efficient. And in terms of agencies that are already at that proficient level, or perhaps above that proficient level, they're already, meeting that minimum recommendation, and they're already doing a fantastic job. In terms of agencies that are perhaps lower from that minimum level, this really serves as a bit of a call to action for how all of the agencies in the sector can really model best practices and collectively raise the sector's digital maturity. So essentially, by those that are already doing well, continuing to doing what they're doing, modeling, sharing their knowledge, and for those that are perhaps at that lower level, looking for examples from their peers in the sector to really continue striving for excellence. As we're getting towards the end of our time here, the last couple things that I'll mention is on the topic of best practices. As part of this assessment, Code for Canada provided a list of what each of those indicators for digital maturity looks like at that proficient level. So really being able to articulate what does it look like, what needs to happen in order to meet that minimum recommended level of digital maturity. And these best practices fed directly into the sort of culminating co-created product of our work with Peel Halton settlement agencies, which was, of course, a digital transformation roadmap, as Jessica alluded to earlier. So on our next slide, we've got a very high-level snapshot of that. And as Dorothy also mentioned a few moments ago, the overall goal of this work was to collectively identify actions that can support the digital transformation of the sector as a whole. So through its extensive engagement that we did with agencies, this roadmap was created to really articulate what is the sector's shared vision when it comes to digital transformation, and to start to map out what are the collective actions that all of the agencies need to take in order to achieve that vision. And you'll see on the right-hand slide there, very notably, that elevating digital maturity is listed as one of those key parts of the sector's digital transformation roadmap. Because again, simply put, when all agencies are working together to elevate their own digital maturity at their individual agency level and at the sector level, it ultimately enhances the overall sector's ability to better meet the needs of newcomers in this increasingly digital world that we live in. All right, folks, that was a lot of talking for me, so I'm going to wrap this up, and I will say that both myself and Dorothy, we would love to speak more about some of the other aspects of this digital transformation work that we did with the settlement folks in Peel Halton. That being said, we know that you've got some incredible other speakers to hear from, so I'm going to thank you for your time and attention, and I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful co-presenters.
Thank you so much, Kay and Dorothy. Really wonderful to capture some of that work from an organizational level, especially, and what can be done to collaborate across. I'm going to pass it on to the other presenters on the research for ensuring access to digital services. So I think Danielle, you're speaking
Yes.
first. Great.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Danielle Langara. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a manager at PLCAS's Center of Excellence, CWICE. I'm really happy to be here to start the discussion on our research project that explored digital equity in newcomer services across Peel Region in Ontario. We can go to the next slide if you don't mind. Thanks, Miriam. So really, I just want to provide a little bit of background. The Service Delivery Network is a collaborative table, a part of Peel Region's LIP, Peel Newcomer Strategy Group. The members focus on innovation and testing new ideas and initiatives that we could imagine scaling across the region in the future. So one area of the focus is around digital equity and inclusion in settlement services. So this community-based research project that I'm going to speak about really saw Service Delivery Network members coming together in partnership to conduct the research. So I'm going to speak very briefly about the organizations. So Peel Newcomer Strategy Group is the local immigration partnership for Peel Region. For this research, PNSG led and really coordinated the digital equity and inclusion research. But PNSG is a project of and funded by the United Way Greater Toronto, and they also receive funding from Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada, and the region of Peel. And PNSG really focuses on engaging and facilitating an integrated network of newcomer services based on local data and planning in Peel region. Our next partner that I'll speak about is Peel Multicultural Council, PMC, which is a community serving organization. And for this research, PMC provided existing data to the research team that was really coming from their digital literacy classes, which have been running for several years, even before the pandemic. And at PMC, they provide settlement and integration services to newcomers to Canada, including English classes, enhanced language training, job search, and many other services across their newcomer settlement program. And then last but not least, the organization that I'm a part of, Peel Children's Aid Society's Child Welfare Immigration Center of Excellence, which is a mouthful, so we use a lot of acronyms, but this is a first of its kind model in Canada, really focusing on the intersection of child welfare with unresolved immigration status issues, settlement needs, or border-related issues for children and their families. And for this research, we joined the research team. We hired a research assistant to really support the project. Our Center of Excellence was launched in 2018, but we now operate an international consultation center, a national training and research program, and we offer services across Canada. We can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So we really wish to thank the project's funder, IRCC. When we originally imagined this project back in 2021, we've had time since then, a lot of lessons learned and a lot of experience navigating digital equity and services in a digital world, right? And so the funding came at a time when we had gone through many iterations of what this project could look like. What we focused on this year in 2024, we focused on the research objectives to truly understand the barriers when folks are trying to access digital settlement services in Peel Region, examining newcomers' perspectives and those who provide service, both for in-person and digital services, and really taking an informative approach to providing recommendations for service delivery so that we're making sure across the sector that the needs of a real set of diverse newcomers can be met. So our research questions were which newcomer groups are not currently accessing digital settlement services and what factors might be contributing to that. And of course, as a community-based research project, it was really important for us to have our proposal be viewed and approved by an ethics board. And so this project was approved by the Community Research Ethics Board. And I'll turn it over to my colleague Gazelle and Seaweiss to take us through the next few slides.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gazelle Walid, and I'm Data Research Coordinator with PLCS, the Child Welfare Migration Center of Excellence, also known as CWISE. In digital equity research, we used a mixed methods approach to understand the experience of newcomers and service providers with settlement services by combining qualitative and quantitative data. We conducted a document scan to review existing studies on digital services for newcomers, and we also interviewed 25 diverse newcomers in Peel region who arrived in Canada within the last 10 years about their use of digital services. Additionally, we also surveyed 16 RCC-funded settlement organizations staff to understand their approach to and their experiences with providing digital services. And lastly, we also studied the finding of Peel Multicultural Council Digital Literacy Exchange Program, which ran from 2019 to 2023, which helped build digital skills among newcomers to improve digital services and better support their settlement journey. Next slide. Our research includes a wide range of participants. Yes, this one. Thank you. Our research included a wide range of participants with age spanning from 18 to 69, and the largest age group is between 30 to 39, representing 36% of our sample. In terms of gender distribution is nearly balanced in this research, with 48% identifying as male and 52% as female. And in terms of education, the majority of our participants have either an undergraduate degree, 44%, or a postgraduate degree, 36%. And the racial composition of our participants reflects the demographic makeup of newcomers at the Peel region, with the majority of our participants identifying as South Asian. Next. Next slide. Thank you. We have surveyed a total of 16 RCC-funded settlement agencies, and the list of service providers shown here represents a diverse range of agencies, each with its own insights on the challenges and opportunities when it comes to digital service delivery. By gathering data from these organizations, we were able to paint a clear picture of how effectively digital services are reaching newcomers and where improvements may be needed. Next. And in terms of analysis, the analysis of demographic data from Peel Multicultural Council Digital Literacy Exchange Program, as known as DLP classes, this program aimed to identify which groups face barriers in accessing digital settlement services due to lack of digital literacy. So the data from the program aligned with our interview findings and provided insights into specific demographic groups as well. In this demographic data, the largest group in terms of attendees was language minorities, followed by females and non-citizens and newcomers to Canada, both of which saw a peak of 413 participants in 2021 to 2022. Additionally, females, participants from low-income backgrounds, and language minorities had the most significant shift in attendees over the period. It's also important to note the continued involvement of other groups as well in this program, such as residents of rural areas, those with no high school education, Indigenous people, and also people with disabilities. Next slide. Thank you. One of our findings in this research was identifying several key challenges faced by newcomers and accessing digital settlement services, which I identified through interviews and focus group discussions. And these challenges fall into three distinct groups. The first group includes newcomers. Thanks. The first group includes newcomers who are not digitally literate and lack the skills to use technology effectively. So they struggle with devices like computers, smartphones, and as a result, rely on in-person support for their settlement needs. The second group consists of newcomers who are not fluent in English, so it's making it hard to access services, which are mostly in English or French language. The last group is those newcomers who arrived those newcomers who arrive as family members of those already settled here, and they're often supported by their families in their settlement process and may not initially need digital services. So now I will pass it over to Brihan El-Gouri from Peel Multicultural Council, who will take us through the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gazelle. So my name is Prihan El-Gouri. I'm from Peel Multicultural Council. Like in the couple of slides, I will go through the barriers that faced by newcomers from our research. So digital literacy is a significant challenge. Many newcomers lack confidence in using devices or navigating online platforms. Even those with basic skills often struggle with advanced digital tasks, making accessing virtual services without family assistance very difficult for them. The second barrier is the language barrier, which is the most common obstacles. Newcomers who are not fluent in English or French face difficulty accessing services, even when using translation tools, which frequently provide inaccurate results at the end. As a result, many prefer in-person services where they can interact with staff who speak their first language. The third barrier is the lack of awareness about validate digital services is a significant barrier for many newcomers. They often assume that in-person visits are mandatory, missing out on the convenience and accessibility of online options. Additionally, concern about the data privacy and the risk of online scams create hesitation and distrust toward digital platforms. These fears are compounded by limited knowledge of how personal information is handled online. Further is discouraging engagement with virtual services. I can give you like a very quick real example from our experience. Like a newcomers with limited English struggle to apply for financial support. With the help of settlement worker, they faced issues like complex terms, so they have to explain to them each term. Documents upload, they didn't know how to upload documents. The system timeout because like she was spending more time to translate and explain to the clients, and unclear requirement. After multiple attempts, the process highlighted how language and digital barrier make essential services hard to access. So this is a quick example. If we go to the second slide, also there is other barriers like the preference in in-person interaction. Newcomers value in-person interaction as they build trust and provide immediate, clear response. Digital services can feel isolating, particularly for those without a social network. They prefer to come and social with our team in person. Another barrier that faced the newcomers is the technology. Technological barriers are a significant challenge for many newcomers. High internet costs can make reliable access to online services unaffordable, particularly for families on tight budgets. Additionally, device malfunctions or outdated software can hold back the effective use of the digital services. Last, additional factors, it could be the immigration status. Immigration status for some residents can limit access to the services, especially for non-permanent residents, such as students and workers, are often excluded from essential services. Professional networking is more effectively facilitated through in-person meetings, and parents frequently struggle to engage with digital services at home due to the childcare responsibility. So usually there will be a lot of other responsibility will eliminate them of availing the digital services. This reinforces the preference for in-person services, which often provide facility like childcare, because if they will come to our organization, definitely they will have some childcare for their children, so they will be able to interact with our staff. Those were the most common barriers faced by the newcomers. These are some of them. And now I'm handing over the presentation to my colleague, Mariam, to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prihan. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariam Mia. I'm the Research and Policy Advisor with the Peel Newcomer Strategy Group. And I'll move on to talking about the survey we conducted with the service provider organizations, because we wanted to get their view of the services that they provide, their interaction with newcomers, and how newcomers take to these digital services in settlement, and what challenges they have faced and troubleshooted for them. So overall, service provider organizations reported that 73% of them saw frequent use of digital services by newcomers. It is a popular mode of service delivery, which is supported by the fact that it's convenient, it's quick, and it's cost-effective in some ways as well, if people have the right kind of access and the right kind of tools as well. As well as looking at providers in terms of their ability to deliver these trainings or their skill set. 60% of our sample providers said that they did receive digital training to be able to deliver these services. Now the sample that we have, it was about 16 to 17 organizations, and they varied in size. So our smaller organizations had up to staff of 10 people, and then our larger organizations had 100 plus. So we saw a very wide variety of the kind of tools they used, which is also reflected in the earlier digital maturity presentation that was shared. So again, something, using Microsoft Office, email, social media, primarily WhatsApp in terms of communication, and other social media apps such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X. So looking at that, which were most common. And then moving into sort of more complex ones, using maybe custom CRM software or software such as Google Suite, Outlook, SharePoint, etc. And then moving on to some of our organizations, which then offered maybe more complex things such as their own LMS systems that they used to maybe deliver services that were some courses or things like that, as well as in some cases AI chatbots. So we saw this wide variety of range of services that were being provided with varying levels of complexity. And that's where the inequity came in terms of, the varying digital skill or literacy levels, as well as language of the newcomers who avail these services. Something very important to note is that despite high levels of use by newcomers and high level of delivery of these services by service providers and the trainings that they receive, 16.7% of service providers still felt uncomfortable delivering digital services. So this shows a gap in effective training, and this also shows that that is something that is an area that needs to be not only focused on for newcomers, but service providers as well. Overall, things that service providers thought worked really well were developing constant feedback loops. So they developed feedback loops with clients constantly taking their input and ensuring that the services that they deliver were adapted or were able to meet most of their clientele's needs. They also had in some cases had in-house troubleshooting, because that's something that is a byproduct of using digital services. You need to have troubleshooting and IT support. So some of them had in-house, but in some cases people still had to outsource it. So they may not have a dedicated IT resource. So this was the service provider perspective in terms of digital services. Now, moving on to what recommendations we came up with. Our basic recommendation was to see how organizations can collaborate and work with each other to ensure that there is equity in digital settlement services that newcomers receive. So one thing that my colleague Prihan spoke about was maybe a lack of awareness, where people may not be aware that a certain kind of service exists, or may not be aware that a certain kind of service exists in the particular language that they need. And so what we recommend is that there should be targeted outreach and partnerships between organizations, as well as targeted outreach to newcomers to promote these digital service options, strengthen referral systems, and centralize them so that there are so that they have access, newcomers have access to the kind of services that do suit their need, and they are able to avail digital settlement services, because a lot of service providers have invested a lot of time in developing these services and delivering these services, and we want to ensure good uptake. And the newcomers that we spoke to, if these barriers that they face were alleviated in some way, they would be willing to try digital services, settlement services. And then another important one that we saw for both settlement service staff as well as newcomers is a focus on digital literacy. So that is still key, because the newcomers that come in, there is a variety of skill levels between them. So to really focus in on that and ensure that they have the tools and skills to be able to make use of these services and be able to reap the benefits that these services provide to them, because in terms of access, they are, then you're not restricted to your geographic specific neighborhood or your geographic location to be able to avail these services. And lastly, we also spoke about, we also recommend addressing language barriers. We understand that our newcomer community is very diverse, and in some cases, English and French may not be either of their spoken languages. So we understand that a lot of service providers do provide these services in multiple languages, but we also would suggest that they simplify their content, maybe focus on more video content or audio guides that may not be that much of a financial investment. So what comes into my mind is maybe something like, an airplane video where even if you don't understand the language, the video is kind of self-explanatory. So, utilize all these different tools that are available, and then again offer multilingual support, and maybe have a repository of organizations who offer specific language support and be able to refer their clients there. So overall the landscape of digital equity in the region of Peel is, you can say it is advancing, and there are various resources, and there are a large number of newcomers who are able to access these resources and make use of them. But we also focused on that group that is fell through the gaps, and understanding what they need to be able to access these services as well, and how we can ensure that the digital equity gap is closed. So thank you for your time. I'll pass it back to Jessica for Q&A.
Great. No, thank you so much for all the presenters for sharing. We have a first question in the chat on the Q&A box. I think for Dorothy and Kay, about when we talked about the levels of digital maturity. Can you share how you conducted the assessment?
Sure, I can jump in and kick things off, and then Dorothy, if you have any additions to add. So as mentioned, when it came to conducting the assessment, we opted with the self-assessment format of the digital maturity tool, so that organizations, agencies could take the time, reflect on it from their own perspectives. Interestingly, agencies were very diverse in how they completed that self-assessment. We sent the tool to the agency's leader, and sometimes that agency leader went and filled out the assessment. Other times they might have shared it with someone else on their team who they thought might be better suited to fill it out. If they had, let's say, somebody in a sort of senior technology or digital or data role, they might have said, hey, can you fill this out on behalf of our agency? And then some agencies said, let's get a whole crew of folks together and let's go through the questions as a team and fill them out ourselves, knowing that within their team, they would have different perspectives and different areas of expertise that they could all contribute to help craft that holistic understanding of what is their agency's specific digital maturity level. So that's a little bit about how it was conducted. Happy to answer any additional questions, and or Dorothy, if you have anything more to add on sort of the how about it was conducted.
Great. It sounds like you covered it off, Kay. Thank you so much. Any other questions out there? I know some of you may have, started along your own digital transformation path, and just checking in, I see a comment here from Alex. Thank you. What would be the difference between having a community app rather than having social media, either Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, etc., and posting settlement services available for newcomers? So maybe I'll direct that to the research group to answer in terms of maybe some of the benefits in terms of accessing some of that newcomer service information via a community app rather than social media. Do you see any maybe benefits or difference? And see if you have any thoughts based on the research.
I can take that. So thanks, Alex, for your question. So in terms of the difference, I think a community app essentially would be great. To be able to sort of centralize all these settlement services. However, when we talk about social media, there are some newcomers who may be able to use only one specific social media app, or maybe comfortable with only one specific social media app. So to have your presence on these various social media apps, just to target people, who are able to, let's say, they may not be able to use more complex apps like Facebook, Instagram, but they may be able to communicate through WhatsApp. in terms of sort of inclusion, it may be better to have your presence on all of these apps, but I think a community app would actually be great in terms of centralizing all those resources and cater to that larger group that is more tech savvy and is able to work with that as well.
Great. Would anyone else like to add in? Thanks so much, Miriam. Great. Kay and Dorothy, any thoughts from your side on that question?
I can jump in with one thought, because we often get this question a lot in our work, working with different nonprofits as well as government organizations on just like, how do we connect with our constituents, our community? Is it best to kind of go through existing apps or creating our own app? I can share just from the kind of technology development side. Selecting, kind of like choosing an app and also building an app is like a lot of work. It's also quite expensive. So actually a number of organizations, especially back, maybe 10 years ago when apps were all the rage, it was like, is there an app for that? A lot of teams kind of defaulted to like building their own app. I think as we've moved increasingly to now, we're seeing fewer organizations kind of taking on that technical debt and like and load of creating their own app. And so because they're finding, I think, a lot of kind of leveraging other platforms that already have the audience and people's like eyeballs basically is a lot kind of lower barrier to entry. But yeah, I think I'm seeing in the chat, like even there's probably other, that being said, if there, because I think just like as Miriam pointed out, what is the benefit is of actually just kind of centralizing everything in one spot. And so if there are apps out there, perhaps even the Welcome to Canada app could be treated as that central place. So maybe it's like that's the nice kind of middle ground or best of both worlds.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for adding in, Dorothy. I see a question from Ahmed. Knowing that IRCC will not provide funding for digital literacy starting from 2025, what are your suggestions for settlement organizations to overcome the digital gap for newcomers? Does anyone want to take that question? I can share a thought. I know this has come up, especially for some of our communities that are really relying on that hybrid model. Digital literacy supports are so essential, and what they have done is a project with a digital navigator role. But as you mentioned, there are difficulties with sustaining that role. So what we're in sort of exploration mode around is, could that role be a shared role across different organizations, so that one organization, again, doesn't have to take on necessarily the burden of having to really sustain that role, but maybe that could be something shared across. So just another example of collaboration that can happen. But Prihan, do you have any other suggestions, knowing that Peel Multicultural Council did digital literacy programming?
Like our program was funded by Region of Peel, especially like as you can see the data was more forward to the client who's receiving like financial assistance from Region of Peel, like contrary work or the contrary disability. So maybe this is another way, is to find another funding, not through the IRCC, for such a program, because it's really important, like as we saw, like from the research, from our clients that we assisted since 2019, like there is a big demand for learning those simple digital techniques, like how to open the computer, how to use emails, how to navigate through the internet. We do have a lot of people really lacking of all those skills. So it's really important, like to find a way, funding, anything that can help those clients because they are really in need for it. That's my opinion. Thank you.
That's wonderful and great suggestion to look at other sources of funding if possible. Any other thoughts on that point around digital literacy and how to overcome that gap for some? Okay. Thanks so much, Prihan. There's another question here. I know, Miriam, you mentioned in the presentation, in order to address language barriers, videos, audio guides can be useful. However, even making these guides digitally accessible seems difficult, so it's sort of a catch-22. Do you have a suggestion for the type of platform to mitigate this challenge?
For sure. I think so. In our conversations, even those who were had very low levels of digital literacy were still able to text from their phones and in some cases use WhatsApp. So use the basic features on phones. So maybe, having small video clips that could be shared across WhatsApp. And then in another case, agencies, their own websites, or maybe hosted on YouTube, because some people who face language barriers also face digital literacy barriers, but not all of them. So, catering to that group who are able to access YouTube and are able to maybe get onto a settlement agency's website and access those videos, those platforms might be useful.
Wonderful. And Lucy
If I
added
can add something.
For sure. I'll just mention that Lucy's mentioned that videos and materials should be shared among service provider organizations, which is a great idea. Go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, that is great. I just wanted to add something else that comes to mind that we didn't talk about in the research is we had a question mark about how we would be actually engaging in the interviews. Would we be doing interviews in person predominantly or virtual? And I can't remember how it turned out in the end, but Miriam, maybe you could share with everyone just sort of, even though people may not be accessing services virtually, there was quite a bit of virtual interviews that we conducted.
For sure. So out of the 25 interviews, 8 were in person and the rest of them were virtual. So people were able to log in and connect to a call, which was great. So even with, digital literacy, we saw there were varying levels from, not being able to operate a computer to maybe not being able to connect to a video call to maybe being able to connect to a video call, but not being able to, use more advanced tools there, not being able to access Google Drive, things like that. So again, we saw a huge variation. So we kept the option open between between conducting them in person as well as virtually or over the phone, so that we could cater to all kinds of all kinds of newcomers with varying needs and varying skill levels.
Great. Something else that comes to mind is that we're being encouraged to think about asking preferences at intake in terms of how people want to interact. And from the research, it sounds like sometimes it's in person to start, and then it might evolve to digital. But then what we heard loud and clear from organizations is that we have to make sure that staff are very comfortable. And as we heard in the research, that sometimes staff are still not comfortable with some of the digital tools. So just thinking about some of these guides and the literacy piece, like making sure that we bring staff along as well with the evolutions as everything's moving so quickly. I don't know, Kay and Dorothy, if you have any thoughts or suggestions on that point of how to, when people may have responded that in terms of the digital maturity, maybe some of their staff don't have the skills, or do you have suggestions on how best to make sure that everyone's kind of leveling up within an organization?
I can go first, yes. For sure. So, as I mentioned, depending on sort of what level an organization is currently sitting at in terms of digital maturity, there's different things that an organization might do to sort of raise that digital literacy of their staff. One of which is ensuring that, you know, there's time and there's opportunity for folks to engage with, you know, new technology or new to them technology in a low stakes, low barrier type way. No one wants to be, you know, going, you know, face to face, interacting with a client and having to, you know, use a new technology that they've never, you know, tried before, and to feel like the stakes are incredibly high. If I make a mistake on this technology, it's going to have a direct impact on this client. Nobody wants that type of situation. So ensuring that there are scenarios where staff can experiment with, get comfortable, play, make mistakes, fail, learn from them with whatever the new technology is or ways of which data is being used. That's absolutely essential. Carving out that time can feel like a really big thing, and yet it's so valuable. The return on that time investment is off the charts.
Thanks so much. That's great. Any other questions out there? I know that we've had such a great audience, so thank you so much for your engagement so far. And so just again, opening it up if there are any questions or even comments on your journey that you've been taking, either within an organization or perhaps across the sector. I just want to give a shout out to you know, there was, I think, is Matthew Dunlop still there? Yeah, he's here. And so just, you know, a great example of working across, Matthew from the YMCA Southwestern Ontario, just, you know, some of the great work, you know, thinking about how organizations can think about referral together with systems. So great. So, you know, it would be great to, if you have any other questions on this topic of maybe collaborating across. I know that we've had some examples here of how we can learn from our organizations and what each other are doing, how we can level up together, and how we can share in some of the research. But I think ahead, what we're hoping to do is also think about how can we learn as a sector from the data that we might be able to pool together. And so that will take obviously some stewardship roles around data and some bigger picture thinking about how can we make sure that data is shared and can help with some planning that can happen even at a more local level. I'm just gonna maybe ask Dorothy, you know, do you have any thoughts on that idea of data stewardship and you know, if people are embarking as a group of different organizations and pooling together data, do you have any thoughts on sort of data stewardship roles and what kind of entity would be best to kind of play that role?
That's like the $1 million question. But that's okay. You can put me on the spot, Jessica. Yeah, I mean, I guess the concept is like quite simple when you take some steps back, but in practice it's often challenging to kind of define and execute. Typically, you know, where we see kind of really effective collaboration, and we call it effective collaboration, and we kind of think of it in terms of technology, right? Like we're talking about data and data stewardship and data governance. And what does that actually look like in terms of, you know, we've just talked about digital maturity and actually like starting to use some digital tools, and what do those tools look like and what are the technologies? Often the area where all of this comes together from a technology's perspective is what they often say in the technology world is like roles-based access control. So it's essentially determining, depending on which group or stakeholders or stakeholder groups, what is the kinds of data that they might contribute to a shared kind of database or common understanding that everybody can see as like in a central location, And then similarly, what can all other kind of stakeholder groups also access from this shared kind of database or structured database? And really, what that comes down to is it requires a lot of conversations, right? It starts with at the end of the day, it's like we're all humans. It's actually just getting everybody aligned on each group's kind of different goals and outcomes that they're trying to achieve with that data. And then from there, working from this collaborative model to actually translating it to a piece of technology that worked for everyone. So it is a process. There's not to be honest, there's not a ton of kind of case studies or examples out there that follow these really strong like data stewardship and data governance approaches. But you might find it more commonly in like academia. That's what we find that's where maybe it's the most common. But yeah, it is. I would say it's a exciting kind of next step or opportunity for, especially when we look at the diversity of the settlement sector in Peel and Halton, where the sector as a whole could go.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for responding so on the spot on it. Yeah, it's something that I've really been thinking about more is we're thinking about the future and as we try to align our systems so that we can pool some data together. I'm just going to ask each of the presenters if you have any final thoughts about sort of where you're taking some of the lessons learned from the research or from the work that had been done in Peel and Halton. Anyone want to share any final thoughts?
I can go ahead. So I think what we've learned from both Code for Canada's work as well as the joint research project is that where settlement service organizations may be communicating, but they're not communicating enough. So communication is key and collaboration is key going forward to ensure that we strengthen this sector, especially when it comes to their digital maturity, digital transformation. I think having open avenues of communication, sharing best practices, these things need to be sort of built into the daily routines of the settlement organizations. And there's, I think together, sort of coming together and focusing more and more on how to collaborate to move ahead is definitely going to be very, very helpful in both these aspects.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Miriam.
Maybe I'll go next because I'm a little bit of a philosopher about it. So I think that what really strikes me is the fact that everyone is on a journey and we can choose to be on the journey together or kind of separately. And if we really want to be inclusive, we're going to really kind of think about the people who are ahead and how can they help us. And we're going to make sure no one gets left behind, right? So including the voices and the input of people is really important as we continue to imagine and reimagine constantly what service can look like. So that's sort of my takeaway.
Thanks so much, Danielle.
For me, I agree with Miriam and Danielle and even Dorothy. I think we need an association umbrella to take all the settlement organization under it. So we will have one database, one data will be shared with everybody. Like for example, in Employment Ontario as an example, like all those organizations under it, they have only one database. Like if a client will go to A organization and want to go to B, they have to notice organization A before going to B. So I think this is the leg, as Mariam was saying, we need to work together, collaborate together as one whole services for the newcomers. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Prehan. Any other final thoughts? Well, I want to just say thank you so much to the presenters. I know that we've been so lucky to work with Code for Canada and the many partners around this table. And it's really led to some more conversations that have been brought together through a digital transformation committee that has been formed, just to really ensure that we get more of that conversation going and figure out where our priorities are. And I think that's where some of the discussion around interest around artificial intelligence, for example, how can we share governance policies? How can we look ahead to, you know, future roles, knowing that there might be this centralized entity or likely in Ontario, among other places in Canada, really under IRCC's direction for needs assessment and referral system that's more centralized. So I just want to give a huge round of applause to the presenters again. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for the engagement from the audience. So we'll give you the benefit of a few minutes back as you transition to your the rest of your day. And if the presenters want to stay online, we'll do a little group photo for posterity. And thank you so much, everyone.